Hardwood's expensive, but if you know where to look, and you have the tools that you can mill it yourself, you can turn stuff that people would call just junk into some great projects. All this white oak, red oak, walnut, different kinds of maple, cherry, this was all cut-offs from the mill. They were letting their employee take it home and sell it for firewood. I bought as much as I could, and it's been acclimating the shop for a long time. It's just aching to be turned into a bench. This is a great way to get some hardwood. You're just going to get short lengths, because they're cut-offs. But you can really get some good stuff. Grab all the 4x4 pieces you can if you're going to make this bench. The longest pieces are only 4 foot long. You won't have trouble finding those. But also grab all those short, foot and a half 4x4 pieces. Those are going to make our top. When you're using this kind of wood, it all comes down to the milling. You're going to be spending a lot of time at your joiner and planer. So take out a wire brush and clean as much of the dirt and grit as you can off all the sides of the boards. It'll save a lot of wear and tear on your blades. Now if your stock's too wide for your joiner, you're going to have to rip it down on your table saw. But remember, one of the downsides of using this type of wood is that it's often going to be twisted, bowed, there'll be internal stresses. That can be dangerous on a table saw, so if you're not sure, take it over to the bandsaw. You don't want to risk this thing pinching into your blade and kicking back at you. At the joiner, it's all about taking off a little bit of stock at a time. It's better to remove a 1/16 or a 32nd of an inch at a time than to tear out the grain. Plus, it'll extend the life of your small joiner. After you've got two sides flat, square to each other on the joiner, move it up to the planer. Here we're just trying to get the other surface parallel with the first surface you jointed. Don't worry about how thick it is just yet. I can't believe what people throw out. Take a good look at the grain, choose what you like best, and then cut it to match your joiner. I can afford to cut away some of the bad grain because I only need 5.5 inch boards and the joiner will handle 6 inches. I always mill a lot more wood than I need because I want to be able to pick and choose after I get it all flattened and squared. I'll put the extra under the bench for another project. When I first started out, I thought everything had to be built with 3/4 inch stock because that's what you find at the home centers. But then I learned about resawing. It's great because not only can you customize your piece with your stock thickness, but you can make that nice walnut go a lot further. If you don't have a bandsaw big enough to resaw your stock, you can do it just fine on the table saw. Just use a thin kerf blade and use a shop-made high sacrificial fence. Don't worry if your blade doesn't cut all the way through your stock. Just cut it as far as you can on both sides, flipping it end over end. And then use that kerf as a guide to cut the rest out with a handsaw. Or, if there's just a little bit left, you can use a chisel as a wedge to split it out. Of course, you're going to have to plane your resawn surfaces smooth. So this is our rough stock. We're going to use this piece here for the top. So these two panels are going to make up our back. I wanted to get as straight a grain as I could for the front. Then we got a couple of sets here for the sides. This is going to become the two side wings. And there's our side panel. And then this is for the other side. Whenever you're getting some of this firewood and there's maple in it, you're probably going to find at least a little bit that's got some spalted figure. That's caused when the fungus gets into the wood and it really makes a unique look. Whenever I come across it, I save it for projects like this. I'm going to use some of it for the drawer fronts on this because I think it'll really make a nice contrast with the walnut sides, especially when I do the dovetails. I always used to be really intimidated by dovetails, but then I studied closely the way people who I thought were masters were doing it, and I realized it's not that bad if you use sharp tools and a lot of patience. I learned more from Tommy McDonald about dovetails than I would have learned from years of practicing it on my own. These dovetails are pretty delicate, so I'm just going to use a small, easy to control pole saw. And I don't worry too much about getting right up to the line with the saw curve. I just don't cross it. I can always tune it up with a sharp chisel later. The most important part is don't blow past that guideline you marked up with your gauge on the bottom. So when you get up to it, take it nice and slow. Removing the waste is a part that people often mess up the whole dovetail. You can use a fret saw or a coping saw or nibble it out with the bandsaw if you want. But at your guideline, take it nice and slow. Use a sharp chisel and pare out just a little bit at a time. Work on one side, then the other, and when you get that nice, crisp, straight shoulder established, then you can get a little more aggressive. Meanwhile, the mini cabinet maker's bench is at the dovetail stage 2. These aren't as delicate, so it might be a good time to cut them on the bandsaw. You can even use the bandsaw blade to nibble away the waste. Then, the same rules apply. Take it easy and pare the shoulder nice and crisp. That's what people are going to see. Then get out your mallet. Since this is end grain and it won't help on your glue up, you can make a little hollow between those tails. Just chop at a slight angle from the surface towards the center of the board on both sides. On this bench, I had a lot of fun making the dovetails on the top of the legs. These things are big and beefy, and they're all about power tools. After routing out the sockets, we've got some cleanup work to do. I should have used a sacrificial board behind this. It would have kept that chip out down, but I can repair that later. Too bad router bits don't come in squares, but a chisel can take care of this. Even though this is bigger, heavier material, a delicate hand still should be used, because you can still make these shoulders look nice. After you pare them down, just like with the more delicate joints, chop away with that chisel. In the Stumpy Nubs workshop, we use different chisels for different jobs. This is a Stanley Fat Max chisel. It's not one of your finer paring tools, but it's good for pounding on. It's got a tang that runs from the blade all the way up to the tip, so you can really whack on this baby. That sure saves on your premium tools, so keep a set of these handy at all times. The tails on the legs don't fit completely flush in this socket yet, because we still got to put a faceplate on. If you don't have a computer in the shop, get one. There's nothing like having your SketchUp file right on the workbench so you can check your measurements as you go along. You can make changes to the design on the fly. Of course, that means you got to learn how to use SketchUp. If you don't know how to do that, learn it. After a quick check of the mortise layout, it's off to our modified central machinery mortising machine. It's not the best one on the market, but with a couple adaptations, it cuts square holes just fine. If we're going to mill the mortises by machine, we may as well get out the tenon jig and use the table saw for those too. You can do them with a dado set if you like. In fact, there's at least half a dozen different ways to cut tenons. I hate glue-ups, but right now, both the Charles Neal contest box and the mini workbench are at various stages of glue-up. So I gotta get to work. While we had to resaw some of our stock thinner, other stock has to be glued together to make it thicker. Some people like to put glue on both sides. If you do, that's fine. Just don't go nuts. You'll be surprised how far glue goes once you start spreading it out. This is how you do it. I'm using Gorilla Glue. Pretty good stuff. I learned this in cooking class. You can never have too many clamps. That's not just something woodworkers say. It's deathly serious. With the Charles Neal box project, I have to do some edge gluing to make wider stock. This is where the Gorilla Glue really shines, because it dries fast. About a half hour or so later, and I can already remove the clamps and start cutting it on the table saw. But the Gorilla Glue gets sticky in a hurry, which isn't great for regular glue-up assembly. In that case, we like to use just regular yellow glue. It gives us more time. I'm starting to rethink using the salted maple for the drawer fronts. It looks great, but Spalted wood is rotten wood, and it's just crumbling. I can't keep a nice crisp edge in it. I'm going to have to use some kind of chemical stabilizer, but I think it'll work out alright. It's too late to change it now. Otherwise, I'm pretty pleased with the drawers. The walnut on the sides looks great, and I went with a solid pine bottom. I just felt like it was cheating to use plywood on this project. A week into the Charles Neal Challenge, the deadline is really starting to creep up on us. We've got all the parts cut, we got most of the assembly done, but we still have a lot of work to do. I don't think the Stumpy Nubs workshop is going to be closing down tonight anytime soon. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I gotta get some sleep.